After the Snow. A short story. Once, when I was 7 years old, I found a photograph of my mother. I just crept into the age of curiosity, of rummaging through other people's drawers when left alone, and there it was, her but not her, the world but not the world. Her face was much younger than the face I knew, but I recognized her, or at least I recognized myself and her in the woman's face and knew what that must mean. She was 17 when the photograph was taken, but I saw only an adult, someone almost my mother. I stared, and I could not understand. My mother was dressed in a spotted bra thing and what looked like cut-off jeans, really short, showing the top of her thighs. Her skin was a shade darker, and the people with her, 2 other young women, were dressed the same. They were laughing, smiling, their hair wet like they'd just stepped out of the bath. It looked as though they were outside, although surely that couldn't be right. They were standing on some sort of ground I'd never seen before, a bare thing, beige, grainy. The sun was smeared in the corner of the photograph. Behind them was what only could be water, blue, green, clear, moving water. I had never seen water outside before. I flew down the stairs faster than a sled slides down a steep hill and toppled into the front room. I cried out, "Mum, Mum, where are you?" She was standing right in front of me, looking down at me in confusion. "Well, darling, I'm here." I held out the photograph to her. Dad and Will and Aunt Amy tiptoed across the room to have a look. Dad smiled sadly and Amy glared at me. They both went back to their seats, leaving Will behind. He stared at the photograph, as mesmerized as me. "Where are you?" I repeated. "Where did you find this?" In my excitement and wonder I'd forgotten that I wasn't supposed to go through her things, so I just bit my lip, stared down at the photograph and asked again, "But where are you?" She put her fingers on the edge of the picture, but I did not loosen my grip. It was my find. For the first time in my life I'd stumbled across a snapshot of magic, and I wasn't about to let it go. "We were on holiday," she said, "in Florida." "Where's Florida?" "In America." "America!" cried me and Will together. "It's over the other side of the world," she said. She'd forgotten that we knew that we'd been taught about it in school. We had a big atlas on the classroom wall, all blue and grey and white, the colours of the world. Sometimes the teachers were pointed at it, and here, across the great ice plains, there were other countries. "The world was smaller then," my mother said, looking thoughtfully down at the picture. "How could the world have been smaller?" I asked. "Worlds don't get smaller. That's not how it works." "Well, it wasn't actually smaller." "But you said metaphorically smaller, stupid," said Aunt Amy. She wasn't actually our aunt. She was our dad's first daughter, from long before Mum came along. She worked in the food shop in the centre and had weird dark purple hair and was always arguing with Mum. Me and Will called her Aunt Amy because she was nearly 20 years older than us and because it annoyed her. I ignored Amy, because that annoyed her too. "But Mum," I said desperately, "are you in a building?" No, we were outside." "You're outside?" "Well, yes." Will and I stared between the photograph and her. "But Mum," I whispered, "where's the snow?" We were taught about it later, of course. When primary school ended we were sent to the big school in the next town. It was a whole 4 miles away, too far to take the sled. We had to take the bus, a big red vehicle with thick straps of wheels at the sides. Daily it ploughed through the snow, over ice and bare tree roots from our village to the next town, filled with a smush of children. The journey took nearly an hour. I was terrified that first day. I kept twisting the fur on my sleeves and fidgeting my hands inside my gloves. After all, we all knew the story of the time the heating broke on the school bus in the next district. Stories like that came twice a year with the freight trains that brought us metal, fuel and extra food. They found the bus later that day, the driver frozen solid, 12 stiff children huddled together on the bottom deck, and then, in the centre of the huddle, they found one living child, a girl of 8, warmed by the bodies of her dead schoolmates. I was not afraid of dying on the bus. I was afraid of being that little girl, crying and shaking, surrounded by the dead. Will helped. He shrugged me off when he knew he could, but on that first day he pulled me to sit with him and his friends. I kept kicking my feet in fear that any moment we might be suddenly plunged into stark cold, but in the end the bus was fine, warm, normal. I grew used to it, as we grow used to so many things. At the big school we studied history. They taught us about the world before. We'd already heard the whispers, of course. Most people didn't like to talk about before, even to think about it, and when they did it was always with a sigh or a weird look in their eyes. But some knowledge slipped through the cracks. Elder siblings made casual remarks over dinner, or parents worded sentences carelessly. There was a shop in the centre that sold strange things that nobody recognised, and although you weren't allowed in there until you were 18, the other kids murmured that it sold artefacts from the past. And then I told everyone at school about the photograph of my mother. Only a few believed me. It had become one of those standard rites of passage. You refuse to believe it when you're a real kid. You can't believe the world was ever different from how it is now, like you can't believe there's no such thing as Father Christmas. But at the big school they taught us facts as solid as the lakes. They taught us about beaches and the seaside, about sunbathing and things called bikinis which sounded ridiculous. They taught us about mud and flowers, about fields, about farms. Flowers intrigued us, but none of us believed in farms. Most of our parents worked in the food factories, and everybody knew vegetables grew in glass houses, not outside. They taught us about rain, warm water that poured from the sky, and it was like they told us chocolate could fall from the clouds. They taught us about aeroplanes, about train trips, not on the huge metal freight trains that chugged past outside the classroom windows delivering supplies from the south, but on little tiny flimsy ones. They showed us photographs of these skinny trains, and we all laughed. It seemed so silly, like going around on a toy. We had only ever known a world of black and white, but they showed us pictures of coloured landscapes, of greens, yellows, browns, of blue and lilac skies. They showed us photographs taken only 10 years before we'd slipped into the world, pictures of men and women dressed in underwear. These people of the past wore flimsy vests on top, and on their legs they only wore long johns or what looked like boys' boxers. They showed us pictures of people walking around with bare feet or in mere half shoes. We stared and we stared and we stared. "Mum," I asked one night in my first year at the big school, "is America still liquid?" "No, dear," she said. "There's snow everywhere." Another night I asked her, "How did you get to America when you went? Did you get a sleigh across the ice plains? How long did it take?" She sighed and looked away, and I was too young then not to push her for an answer. "How did you go?" "We took a plane," she said at last. "A flying machine. We flew across the sea. It wasn't ice then, it was water." I said, "I don't believe you." I tried to imagine it. Tried to see myself walking outside in a world of green grass, of outdoor flowers, of food that grew in the open air. I tried to imagine walking about in the weird clothes my mother had worn when she was a girl, pushing my bare toes into warm water, stepping not from cool tiles to the bath, but from this thing called sand into the sea. I tried to imagine walking to school, eating outside, dancing in the moonlight. I tried to imagine this world where people drank outdoors, sitting on wooden benches outside public houses, where they walked in and out of shops whose doors opened onto the outside. I wrote a story for a school competition about the old world. I didn't win, but my book teacher told me she really liked it, that she thought I would have won if it hadn't been for the delicate subject matter. I smiled and nodded at her, but even I knew it wasn't right. I hadn't managed to capture it. It was not my world. Sooner or later, we forgot. That is, Will forgot, and my best friends Lucy and Mags forgot, and the other boys and girls at my school forgot. Poppy from number class had been so excited in our first year at the big school to find out where her name really came from, but even she forgot. Other things took over. First it was friendships and homework, and then people started going out, which mostly meant staring at each other in school and going to the centre together on Saturdays. Lucy got a boyfriend, and Mags and Poppy got together, and even Will had some girl he liked. When I was 13, Aunt Amy surprised us all by announcing that she was getting married to a man who went by the name of Fox. He was one of those rarities, a man who had not been born in our village. He was a traveller from a whole 40 miles away. He claimed to have seen the great ice to the north, to have lived on its shores as a boy, and I never knew whether or not to believe him. He was careless and strange, the kind of person you didn't want to be alone with, although you never quite knew why. As far as I could see, the only reason Amy liked him was because his truck had a really advanced heating system that we didn't have, and if she lived with him she wouldn't have to share a house with Mum. I liked Fox even less than I liked Amy, but I had to say yes when they asked me to be the bridesmaid. I knew Amy didn't like me much, but she didn't have many friends, and anyway I was her little sister, which meant she could order me about and dress me in whatever weird coloured furs she wanted. For a few months everyone at school crowded round me and asked me questions about Amy's wedding furs and what her husband-to-be was like, and all the girls and boys and couples started planning out their own weddings. I shrugged the questions off and sat in the corner of the classroom, wondering what people had worn to weddings in the old world. At 14, someone discovered alcohol, and because Poppy lived with her uncle and he didn't care much about her, we all started going round to hers on Friday evenings. We'd drink vodka until it burned our throats, and fall asleep in her warm basement until Mags's dad came to collect us in his truck the next morning. We'd get in with sore heads and not say a word when he dropped us off at our houses. The others forgot, but I remembered. I could not pretend the knowledge away. I could not go on living as though our parents and their parents had lived like we did. It seemed so odd, so impossible, so unfair that my mother's school days had been immeasurably different to mine, that she'd once been all the way to America in a flying machine. It was all very well for Will to shrug and say it didn't matter, but if their world had changed so quickly, why shouldn't ours? We might wake up tomorrow to find that there was no snow at all, that suddenly the sun was glowing red and we'd all be boiling to death. If it was really so much colder now than it had been 30 years ago, like all the textbooks said, then people must have frozen when it got colder. I thought of the little girl on the broken school bus, and then I thought of people dressed like my mother in the photograph, freezing, shivering, dying in their empty, open streets. I stopped asking my mother questions. She always frowned and sighed when I did. I went to school, did my homework, got drunk with my friends. I was doing all right in school, well enough to one day be able to get on to the management scheme at the food factory if I was lucky, or to work in the library in the centre. I liked books. But books were not enough. All the books at the centre library were modern ones, books that came in on the freight trains from the city twice a year, along with extra food supplies and the other things we couldn't make in our district. If you love writing, my book teacher told me, if you really love it, you can write a book and send it in an envelope to the city, and if they like it too, they'll make it into a real book, and hundreds will come back in a box on the freight train the next year. I asked her what had happened to all the old books, the stories of the world before the snow, but she only shook her head. I ate meals with my family, took the sled to the centre, went running at the gym. Occasionally we took the truck and went to see Amy and Fox, and more often than not, just Amy. Amy was pregnant by now, and when we went round all I did was stare at her stomach, feeling a bit queasy at the thought of a child who was half her and half Fox. Fox always seemed to be away somewhere, and Amy never told us where. "He's out driving," she'd say, and me, Will, Mum, and Dad would all breathe in sharply together. I kept thinking, he'll die one day. The heating will break, or he'll get lost in a blizzard, and then worst of all, Amy will come and live with us again. It was a cruel thought. I was old enough to know that it was cruel. One night, when I was 15, I dreamt of the old world. Not of the old world itself, but of the old world turning into ours. I dreamt of people burning books to keep warm, a muddled chaos of biting flames of black and white burning to red. I dreamt of people freezing on their streets, in their houses, in all the places they thought they were safe. I dreamt of people trapped in ploughs and trucks. I dreamt of a world that changed overnight from green to stark white. That night, Aunt Amy went into labour. Will was out with some friends, so it was just me and my parents for dinner, until the phone rang, and we heard Amy's crackly screaming down the line. I heard a lot of nonsense, and a few indistinct swear words, something about Fox, something about my mother. I sat on the sofa, reading my book, ignoring them like Amy usually ignored me. "Isn't Fox there?" asked my mother, once my father put the phone down. "I have a feeling Fox is never there." He spoke quietly. "I better go and get her." "Should I come too?" "Probably not." I looked up in time to see my mother's pained smile. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "You go." He hugged her, then headed for the garage to warm up the truck. Me and Mum sat back down on the sofa and pulled the fur blanket up around us. I looked down at my book, and then, a few pages on, once I'd heard the trundle of the truck leaving, I turned towards her. She was staring hard at the wall. "I hope it hurts her," I said quietly. "Oh no, darling, no." She sounded appalled. She sounded weary. There was a moment's pause. "You mustn't blame Amy, you know," my mother said. "It's not her fault she doesn't like me. Her mother died when things changed." I swallowed. "I didn't know that," I said. And then, because I couldn't help myself, "What was it like?" She shook her head. "You're taught it all in school." "Not the moment," I said, and when she looked at me blankly, I went on. "They teach us before and after, but they don't teach us about when it changed. Did lots of people die? What was it like when the snow fell? Did you think the world was ending?" She opened her mouth as if to speak, and then stopped. I half knew the words that were on the tip of her tongue. The world did end. My mother sat up straighter on the sofa, twisting her body to turn towards me. "Not many people died," she said. "But at first we didn't know how serious it was, so some people pushed it, travelled too far and got stuck. Helena, Amy's mother, she was a cyclist. She rode a bike, like a thing with wheels. I can't explain it. She used to ride her bike every day, and when it got colder she just didn't stop. She got lost one day, in the snow." She paused. "That happened a lot at the beginning. People didn't realise what was happening. I mean, it wasn't sudden. It used to snow before, though not often. It was just a few weeks a year, maybe not even that. We used to get the day off school when it snowed." This seemed so ridiculous that I laughed, and then stopped short. I thought of Amy's scowling face, and wondered how I'd feel if my mother had been eaten up by ice. "One winter," said Mum, "the snow just didn't stop." "What's winter?" "A season. We had seasons then. Different times of year felt different." She looked away. "I used to love the snow." I stared at her. It was like someone saying they loved carrots or brushing their teeth, saying they loved the smell of the school bus or the fact the sky was grey. It was like saying you loved fur or feeling your heart beat. I couldn't tell whether it was beautiful or stupid to love something so ordinary. "It was different then," she said, looking round at me. "We used to make balls of snow and throw them at each other." "Why?" She wasn't listening. She turned her face away from me and was watching the snow fall out the window with a strange expression. "We used to pile snow on top of each other, make it like it was a body, give it a hat. We made people out of snow." "But why?" "Because it was magic then." She spoke so quietly that I barely heard. You can't imagine it, but back then when you'd step outside into the first snow of the year, it felt important. We'd all shout to each other that it was snowing. Everyone would run to the windows and go outside. It seems silly now." "But why don't you talk about it?" I asked. "Why does no one talk about the world before the snow?" Her mouth tightened. She looked away. "Is it because it's not allowed? Because it's supposed to be a secret?" "No," said my mother softly. "It's because it's sad." She shook her head. "It's okay," she said. "We're alive. Life went on. But we lost something. That's all. We lost a lot of things." She was staring out the window again. Sitting beside her, I closed my eyes. I tried to believe it, to dream her words. I drew the best picture I could in my mind, and for a moment I could see it, a mishmash of images. There was my mother, barely older than me, in her bikini top and denim shorts, stepping out the front door to dry concrete like the ground in the centre. I saw her standing still as white fell down upon her, light sprinkles like you sometimes saw in the sky at dusk before the night blizzards came. I could see her, this near-naked girl, long bright hair glittered with snowflakes. She smiled as she raised her hands to the sky. I opened my eyes, and the image was gone. I stared with my mother out of the window. Together we watched as white specks danced in the black sky.